Oh, I'm delighted to share with you a presentation that I've been putting together for the past several weeks. It is an attempt to show phases of self-inquiry which leads to self-realization. Now, for those who have been in this message, we all know that there are no such thing as a step-by-step process of self-inquiry that leads to self-realization. I understand that. What we're trying to do here is describe a paradox that can't be described. Yet, what we can agree on is that there is an apparent ego that is looking away from itself at 180 degrees and turning 180 degrees back onto itself is self-realization. So there is some sort of phasing that is happening here that we all fall on. We can either be 180 degrees away from ourselves, or we could be somewhere in between that. And maybe some of us watching this might be a jnani, somebody who is a self-realized being. So again, I'm trying to describe a paradox here, and all of this is coming out of my own direct experience of the several thousands of hours of self-inquiry that I have. And how is it that I know that I am heading in the right direction, so to speak, as I relinquish all my identities and I start to experience this ever-present happiness that is depicted on this channel? It's because I'm reading this book simultaneously, and this book is what I would consider the most profound wisdom there is. The book is entitled Guru Vachaka Kovai, and it is Sri Ramana Maharshi's words written down by Sri Muruganar. And this is as profound as it gets. What I'm experiencing is what the sages say remains after you drop into this realm of being and you self-investigate to see who you actually are. And so this presentation is nothing more than a gracious attempt to depict this experience of self-realization. Feel free to add questions in the comments or email me directly. I will get to every one of your questions. May this presentation lead to ever-present happiness. Take care.
Hello. I'd like to start this video off with a basis of understanding in which everything we discuss here will be based around. I like to say it's a barrier because from an egoic point of view, the ego perceives this notion of self-inquiry as some sort of a destination that's extremely challenging to get to, and it sees that it's got to cross this somewhat barrier that I like to call it. And I've titled this barrier the manifestation existence barrier, where everything on the upside of the barrier, the manifestation, is the egoic realm. And I put the word unreal there because from the point of view of self, this world that the ego lives in is unreal. And anything below the barrier is existence, or you could say it's consciousness or awareness or being. And from a self's point of view, it is what's real. It's the only thing that's real. In fact, from a self's point of view, this barrier doesn't exist at all. Yet, from an ego's point of view, it definitely does. And this is what we're going to try to get our arms around today. The everything on the upside of this, and moving from an egoic mindset into a way of being by dropping below the barrier into existence. And I'm just going to go over a few examples. If you've been following me at all, you might have heard these in some of my past videos, just so that you get an understanding on what above the barrier is versus below. So again, this space is finite and limited. It's what the ego takes to be real. It's the objective world in which it itself is an object that's limited, that's in here somewhere and ends at the skin. Then there's space, and then everything else is around it too that it has to maneuver through to survive. Where on the existence side, it's infinite and boundless. And this is the description of self. There are no limits here. There are no boundaries here. This is complete freedom. And this is why it's so favorable to attempt in any way you can to cross this barrier from limitation to boundlessness. You could say anything above the barrier is the matter first model, where the matter first model states that 13.8 billion years ago, the Big Bang happened, matter came into existence, and then a few billion years ago, we started climbing out of the ooze, and a few million years ago, we had 4 legs, and then we stood up on 2, and we developed a brain, and once we developed a brain, consciousness arose out of that brain. But everything I just said, that's what I consider the matter first model, which is the majority of the world's model of reality. But there's absolutely no evidence for that reality. It's quite perplexing that how it's gotten so far. I don't want to go too deep into it, but I find the matter first model super intriguing because there's no evidence. That's why it's so intriguing that we all, most of us, if not all of us, believe in it. Where down below the barrier is the consciousness first model. It states that all there is consciousness. There's one substance here that makes up all of totality, and this one substance has no idea what separation is. And according to Advaita, there's no thing that stands independent from anything else. It's just the one reality, the one existence of awareness appearing as many. And anything above this line is what's considered ignorance. Ignorance has nothing to do with somebody's intelligence or how smart they are or anything like that. It is simply the forgetting of yourself. We are the best forgetters that have ever been created. And it's the ego that does the forgetting. Egos, you could say the ego's underlying reality is forgetfulness. So here we're trying to dissolve ignorance to lead us to wisdom. And wisdom is the direct experience of your own being. It's when yourself directly experiences itself, or you might have heard me say before in Ramana Maharshi's words, it's when consciousness becomes aware of its own existence. It's just you know yourself directly as yourself, and you don't know any other thing because there is no other thing. There's only yourself. And this would be turning outward. So we're so used to turning out into the world and seeing objects and trying to create situations that make us happy. And we do that through trying to gain wealth or climb the career ladder or go on epic adventures or relationships, substances, anything that's all an outward motion that moves us away from ourselves. And here we turn inward. This is the whole message of Advaita, is that for those that can't hear it through silence, which is very few of us, the majority of us who are heading down this path, we have to make an apparent effort to turn inward in a process known as self-inquiry. And that's what this whole video is about, is understanding self-inquiry and the apparent phases of self-inquiry. And I'll get into that more here in a minute. But I also want to point out that if you notice, everything above the barrier is all in lowercase, and anything below the barrier is in uppercase. Okay, now I want to get into the graph that we're going to be going over for the remainder of the show. And down here at the bottom I have self. It's being, consciousness, bliss. You could also say that it is existence, and awareness, and happiness. And for those of you who have been at Advaita for a while, this is known as Sat Chit Ananda. And out of this self arises I am. I am is the first utterance that arises out of self. And because it's not colored by anything, it doesn't have anything attached to it, it still is considered in the realm of being. It's below the barrier. Those of you who have been here for a while might have heard this as the I thought. It's what Ramana Maharshi, that's in Ramana Maharshi terms, the I thought. It could be the root of I, but it is the first utterance. If you're in self-inquiry right now, you've noticed that when you turn within, there are times where it just bounces out of you, like I am. I am. That's I am is I am. And so, all right, so watch what happens here next. There's actually two things that come in here simultaneously, and then the third one, which I have at top, is just a label. The moment that anything is added to I am, an ego comes into play. Okay, so this is what I mean by coloring of the I am. You're adding adjuncts onto I am. And the moment you add anything onto I am, you step away from your own being. You cloud your glory. You veil your happiness, your being. And adding adjuncts is saying that, like, for example, I am an engineer, I am a biker, I am a husband, I have integrity, I enjoy activities, and so on. The moment that you add anything onto I am, an ego comes into play, and you step away from the love of yourself. But, as we've discussed before, you always have to tether back to your being through I am. So an ego takes itself to be a solid entity, but in reality an ego has two pieces to it, you could say. It has a real piece of I am, and it has an unreal piece of adjuncts or identities, like I have it added up at the top there, where it says ego is I am plus adjuncts. Well, an ego sits between these two. It's kind of like, maybe it's like a barrier like that. It holds these two together. Okay? And the goal here is to break this sever, which then collapses the adjuncts into I am. Now we're going to move into the graph. So what I have here, I'm going to move that up a little bit. So I have this, what will be an 180 degree turn. But anything above the barrier line is a realm of ego, and anything below the barrier is, you could say, in the realm of being. And what we're going to do is we're going to move this adjuncts arrow from the 1, 2, and 3. We're going to pivot it around the ego, and we're going to talk about these apparent phases. And the red phases is when we have our attention on our mind, body, and world. And the green phases is when our attention is on being. And as I've mentioned several times in the past, there are no real phases, and there definitely is not a step-by-step guide to self-inquiry so that you can reach self-realization. This is just a gracious attempt to give you an understanding of what's possible here. Now the red phases, phases 1, 2, and 3, to an ego, those could be considered steps. But once you dip below the barrier, it cannot be a step-by-step process, because you're dipping into the infinite, and you cannot use your mind to know the infinite. The infinite can only know the infinite, and the finite can only know the finite. So if you use your mind to try to understand, which is your mind is finite, if you use your mind to try and understand the infinite, you will fail. And so this is where you just have to let go. Also, we are somewhere on this chart. We're either at 0, which we're as far away from ourselves as possible, or we've turned our attention 180 degrees, and we're known as a jnani, or a self-realized being, or somewhere in between, which most of us are on this graph somewhere. And most of us are going to be in phase 1. Which is okay. And I'm going to go over that here in a minute. Okay, I've simplified it. I've gotten rid of all of the descriptors of the barrier line and moved it over so that we can add some verbiage here. Okay, and I just shifted the I am and the adjuncts onto the chart here, and I'm going to pivot the adjuncts around the ego as we hit these different apparent phases of self-inquiry. And please bear with me while we're on the 0 and the 1, because these are somewhat one and the same. And so you'll see what I'm talking about here in a minute. Okay, so the ego is straight up. The adjuncts are straight up. You're as far away from your being as possible. You're at a total 180 degrees away from yourself. And this is complete identification with the ego. All right, there's no inkling that there could be anything else, that reality could be anything else besides a rigid person and body. You're veiled in mind, sensation, and perception. So your mind, your egoic mind, is your mind according to you. That's who you are. Sensation, it means your body. This body's you, and you're contained in here somewhere, and all of these feelings and emotions are yours. And then in perception, everything that you see, smell, taste, and touch and feel, those are all real objects. and you are not open to hearing another possibility, that this is reality. And it is not a wrong way to live. I want to make that very clear. Advaita says that it's not the only way. It recognizes that the ego is apparently here. It is apparent reality, and we don't deny reality in Advaita. We just let everything be as it is, and therefore living a life as an independent individual who believes they're a person in this body who has a mind, that is a way of living. All Advaita says is that there is a better way of living, a more favorable way of living, where you can experience this life in a realm of peace and serenity. So that's the difference. There's nothing wrong with living as an ego. But life here is miserable. When you are 180 degrees away from yourself, life is not fun. You could say that this is where evil comes into play, and hate, and harm, and maybe emotions like anxiety or depression, fear, being scared, loneliness. No, this is not any fun. I know. I've been there. I've lived in fear. I know what that means. And it is not a place where I wish anybody to be. And so, this just means that you've detached from yourself, and you don't know how to come home to yourself. Somebody's really got to point it out to you. And so then we move into phase 1, you could say. And again, this is going to be like 95% of the world is going to be here, where you still have complete identification with the ego. You're still veiled in mind, sensation, and perception. You're not open to hearing another possibility. And maybe it's just because it hasn't been presented to you. It's probably the most likely case. But even when you hear it, because it's around us, it's around all of us, we choose not to hear it. We're just not open enough. Again, it's not a wrong way to live whatsoever. And life is okay here. Most of the people that I know are right here. Right? Life's going all right. It's okay. We all know these people. They seem to be, from an egoic point of view, the lucky ones. They just seem to be doing life right. Life is coming through them. They haven't moved far enough away from themselves to find so much discomfort that they need serenity, and so they hang out here, and I get that. And so you can see the slight difference between 100% away at 0 and then in phase 1. Again, neither of these phases are incorrect. We're not saying living a life of ego is wrong. There's just a more favorable way. So as we move into phase 2, we start to experience open and willingness to explore and seek new possibilities of enlightenment. Maybe we were phase 1ers or 0 phasers, and somebody said something to us. Maybe we saw a video. Maybe we picked up a book that fell off the shelf, or maybe somebody set a book in your lap, which is what happened to this guy right here, that opened his eyes to a totally different possibility. And we become open. We could say the ego is waking up here. We're waking up to our own being. And this is where seeking begins. This is where we start to say, what was in this book? what's going on here? There's something different. I'm not who I think I am. Well, that's kind of intense in a way. But I'm open to it. I'm curious. I'm willing. And we go on this journey of seeking. And some of us seek for a short period of time before we come into this message of non-duality, and some of us seek for decades before we get lucky enough to have non-duality come to us. Then we jump into stage 3. And this is when we engage into spiritual practice. So in 2, we were open and willing. It's very important here. This is open, and willingness is really the start of the whole path. But here we engage into spiritual practice. Like we might go to retreats, or we might start what I have here. I could say we start to calm the mind, but we start to engage into meditation practices. So this is an effort being made, because we've heard about this calming the mind to ease our psychological suffering, and we start to do anything that we can to alleviate it. Some of the practices are known as breath control, or mantra-based meditation, or mindfulness, chanting, or puja. And puja is just the repeating of a deity's name over and over again. It's somewhat like a mantra, but a mantra does not have any meaning to it. It's more of a meaningless word, where puja definitely has some meaning to it. But the difference between this and self-inquiry, this being meditation and self-inquiry, is night and day. So meditation is when our attention is on our mind and body. Okay, we're either focusing on our mind through like mindfulness, or doing other efforts to calm our mind. We could be focusing on sound through, say, chanting, or we could be focusing on our body through, say, breath control. But this is attention on mind and on body. It is not on our being. It's not until we cross the barrier and head into the realm of self-inquiry that we start to encounter true, lasting benefits of our apparent efforts. And then we get to crossing the barrier. So here is where the rubber hits the road. This is a line that is apparently here to an ego, and to cross it seems extremely challenging and extremely difficult, and it's unknown. And that's true. It is unknown to an ego. An ego cannot know what's on the other side of this barrier, again, because it is a finite entity. The mind is finite, and it cannot know the infinite directly. So that's where the ego gets tied up. Right? It wants to know everything. It wants to know if it's going to cross this line, what's on the other side of it. And you can't know. You can't describe what being is. And here's the paradox. You are it right now. Right? You're being right now. You exist right now. You're aware at this moment. And that's what's on the other side. So, again, back to the two pieces of ego. It's adjuncts and I am. You're I am. You're right now. I am. So, crossing this barrier. There seems to be two ways to experiencing self-realization. And one is self-surrender, and the other is self-inquiry. And they both lead to the same place. But it appears that crossing this barrier at first requires self-surrender, where you are surrendering yourself to the infinite, to your I am. You're surrendering yourself to yourself. And what this is saying, truthful knowledge needs are fulfilled. And so what seems to happen is that when we hear this message, we start to turn over all sorts of different rocks to understand what this means. What are the sages saying? What are the scriptures saying? What are teachers saying? And we start to build an understanding on what this actually means to self-surrender, to head towards self-realization. And we compile all this information. And really what it is, it's information that exposes false truths. The false truth about ourselves, which, again, the primary false truth is that we are an independent person that's doing all of this life. That's the true false reality. And we start to build enough knowledge, truthful knowledge, that we're willing to toe this line, this barrier. And in the hopes at the time, only an ego hopes, self has no idea what hope is, that we have the courage to cross this line. Acknowledge being exists. This is, I could say, one of the most pinnacle pieces of it all. Where prior to this, an ego only takes the objective world to be real. Only this manifestation is real. That this thing back here that I heard about it a few times, it's called consciousness, or somebody said awareness was important. It's back here somewhere. It doesn't exist. It doesn't have any value. I'm just gonna keep moving on. But this is when you actually acknowledge that being exists, that you exist, and that your existence is everything. Now, you might not know what that means directly in a direct experience, but you, mentally, in a concept, you know that it exists because you've collected enough truthful knowledge from all of the sages and teachers and books and stuff that you know that it's here. Plus, you're always aware. It's undeniable. And this gives you the courage to cross. This gives you the courage to surrender yourself to this greater substance, this greater one. There's only one. There's only one, the one of yourself. And you relinquish your egoic self to it. And once you're willing to do this, at least give it a try. It seems like it doesn't necessarily mean it all comes at once. It could be an apparent effort, and it's not an effort, and we're going to go over that again. It's relinquishing of effort. It's totally counterintuitive to what we know as doing something, but that's why I make these, to help people understand what that is. But it's relinquishing this ego into self. And trusting self will be there to catch you. It will be. It's already here. It's what's been carrying you this whole lifetime. It's what's been carrying you for eternity. Because it is eternity. You are eternity. Your existence is eternal. And it's here right now to catch you. It's holding you right now. It's not going to catch you. It's already holding you. and you have the readiness to let go. And we'll talk about letting go here, what that means. This is the path of jnana. This is an Advaita term. I'm going to go over a couple other great spiritual practices here, but I'm going to start off with Advaita, the path of jnana. The path of jnana is destroying all false knowledge to wind up in the one truthful knowledge of yourself. Yourself is the truth. And anything other than that, anything other than self, anything other than being is false knowledge. That's how close this is to you. You are it. Passing through the gateless gate. If you've been in this spiritual path, you've heard of the gateless gate. It's a Zen quote. The gateless gate is you apparently go through this gate, and as you turn around to close the door to the gate, you realize there was never a gate there to begin with. That your mind has made up this gate. And that's what the manifestation existence barrier is. It's an illusionary gate that your mind has created. And once you realize that the truth of that, because you become really aware of your existence, of your awareness, of your being, you're like, oh my gosh, I've been making this up the whole time. And entering the kingdom of heaven, Christianity, right? This is what Jesus was pointing to when he would say things like, repent, for the kingdom of heaven is at hand. And you might have heard the original sin. The original sin is when you stepped away from yourself, when you stepped away from the divine, from God, and became apparently separate from him or her. This is crossing back. This is coming back into unity with the divine, with what Jesus was saying. So this just isn't an Advaita. Advaita acknowledges that all great spiritual teachings throughout history, and even quantum physics points to this. Even neuroscience points to this now, and psychology. So this is crossing the barrier. And once you've crossed this barrier, you're in. And I chuckle because you've never been out, but you're in. That's the hardest part for an ego. Because it's relinquishing control. You're not in control. Nothing points to that you ever had control. All of the spiritual teachings and even the physicists and scientists are saying that there's no free will. Everything's predetermined as it is. And when you let go of the control, when you let go of the ego, you drop back in to alignment with reality, and life gets very peaceful. We could say anything above this line is doing. An ego loves doing. An ego is a doer. It's the doer, the thinker, the knower, the expectationer, the conqueror, the lover. It thinks it's doing everything, right? And especially if you're not doing, if you're not a doer in the Western Hemisphere, you're not considered successful, right? And so anything below the line is being. So you're moving from a state of doing, or I should say states of doing, because you take yourself as an ego to be a multiple doer, just like what I said. I'm an engineer, I'm a son, I'm a husband, I'm a friend, I'm a biker, I'm an adventurer, I'm all these things. But being is a way. There is no start and stop to anything. There's no boundaries. There's no difference from me being a husband versus being a biker. It doesn't make that distinction. There just is what is. It's just coming through me. And that's where life gets easy. All right. Something I'd like to point out here. The adjuncts arrow is getting smaller and lighter. So if I back up to the crossing, you see it's still red and bold. And when I drop down here, it's getting lighter. So when you drop down here into this phase 4 that I'm calling it, it doesn't mean that ego drops away 100%. But what happens is that your being starts to engulf it. So there's still egoic tendencies here in this phase. But again, because you have acknowledged being starts to engulf the adjuncts, and it's starting to take center stage as the ego shrinks, as your adjuncts shrink and eventually go to zero. And this is where we say where self-inquiry starts. In self-inquiry, after you've plunged across the barrier and into being, you now turn your attention inwards to start to understand what it means, what the experience of being means. Because a mind can't get it. The egoic mind can't get what that means. So when we turn our attention back onto ourself, we start to experience what being really means again, because we knew it as a young child what it means. So we're starting to remember. And this is done by answering the question, who am I? And when we answer the question, who am I, then that's, you could say, self-realization. That's down there in phase 6, if not 180 degrees. This is where we start to understand what our vasanas are. And our vasanas are inclinations to move away from ourself. So these are these tendencies that animate us, that animate the ego. And they're mental tendencies that make you want to move away from yourself, and they're physical, you could say, efforts or urges that you feel that make you just want to get up and move. And what happens here is that in self-inquiry, you have your eyes closed and you're in silence, and you are feeling these tendencies that want you to be anywhere else but here in self-inquiry. Okay, so your mind's going to play tricks on you. It's going to say things like, this is boring. It's one of its main ones. This is boring. There's no value here. And so you should just get up and go do something that has value. Go do something, right? That this being business is boring. That's a tendency. You start to recognize your mind playing those games. And you go, oh, mind, I'm on you. You don't like it here. And you're trying to move me away from here with this boredom card. I'm not playing your game. I'm going to rest into that tendency. Okay? I'm going to rest. I'm going to relinquish the efforts. I'm going to relax back into that tendency that's trying to move me away from myself. Same thing with any bodily sensations. There's going to be like these pressures and urges that are going to want to be pushing you away from being anything but physically still. Okay? They're just going to be there, and you're going to feel them, and your job is to rest into, to relax into, to relinquish those tendencies. And these vasanas at first are strong. This is really no different than starting anything new, like exercising to lose 10 pounds or something. It's always that first few pounds that's hardest, right? And the same goes here in self-inquiry, because you've trained your mind for how many decades to move away from your being, to move away from yourself. And so these things, these vasanas are going to come up. Your mind's going to play as many tricks on you as it can. Your body is going to make as many urges as it can to get up and move away from here. And your job is to relax into them and relinquish them. You will start to understand what this means. You will experience it directly, what it means to relinquish these tendencies within you, these inclinations for you to move away from yourself. And I'll give you an example here on what this means to let go. So, we're born in an open palm, okay? This palm is free floating. It's just a baby. Just a baby. We've all held babies, and they're just these free floating beings. They don't have any boundaries. And somewhere around 4 to 6, we start to hear our parents or our grandparents or our coaches, not our coaches at that age, but maybe our parent or our brothers and sisters say, "You're cute. You're a girl or a boy. And you've got big dimples." And we start to listen to what they're saying, and we start to turn our attention away from ourselves to try to understand what a boy or a girl is, or dimples, or cute. And what that means is that we're starting to build an ego. And an ego is an effort. An ego is a contraction of your being. Okay, and over time, 5 years, 20 years, 30 years, 40 years or more, you build this ego, and it is a fist now. It's a ball of tension. It's a ball of energy, a contraction of energy. And in self-inquiry, we are relinquishing that contraction of energy back into what we experienced as a child. And notice what happened there. When I went from a fist back into a palm, that is no new energy into the system. It's a relinquishing of energy, a relaxing of energy. Keep that in mind. This is exactly how it is. You're relinquishing the contractions that are holding this apparent physical ego into place. And the more you relax, as these tendencies are trying to move you away, they will just lose their power and dissipate. It's quite magical. You will see it. You will see it, meaning that you'll see it experientially, directly. And letting go is understood. This is just what I went over. You're letting go of this palm and going back into a free-floating, boundless being again. And why I say here you can't discern is that an ego is all confused with what it is. It doesn't really have any idea on what should stay and what should go during self-inquiry. It's all mixed, it's all bound up. And depending on where you are coming into this, like if you're in a state of fear or PTSD or any of those negative states, you have no idea what's real and what's not. So that's why I say you can't discern between what should stay and what should go. So you have to let it all go. You have to be willing to let it all go. And self will keep what's real, and it will discard what's false. And that means you come back in line with reality. You come back in line with self, and happiness arises out of that. This fist and palm is what you could call Wu Wei. It's a Taoist term. It's effortless action. So out of effortlessness, something arises out of it. Out of doing nothing, something becomes of it. Out of relinquishing effort, something arises. And what is it that arises? Peace, happiness, contentment, wholeness, satisfaction, everything that you're after. And I like to say it's the relentless pursuit of effortlessness, that you are busting your butt to become effortless. It's a total oxymoron. This is one of the paradoxes of it all, is that you're working your tail off to become nothing, to become free again. And it's this effortlessness is that what we're all after. And it's relinquishing identities, right? Relinquishing, I am a biker, I am a son, I am a traveler, and so on. These are all identities that have to go. They're not you, right? Because I am a traveler. Even if I travel the world, there's no such thing as somebody who is a traveler. There's just traveling happening. And this will start to come into your awareness, what this means. You know, going back to like, I'm not a son, or I'm not a biker. What's happening is sunning is happening, biking is happening, engineering is happening, business ownership is happening. It's all still happening, but I am not those things. I am, and that's all I know. And anybody who's feeling a lot of tension in their body, which everybody does at some level. It doesn't matter if you're a happy ego. You feel tension in your body because you believe yourself to be this contraction, this body, this solidity here. But when you're really in bad shape with fear, anxiety, PTSD, all of that, this expansion of your physical body is a wonderful feeling, because what's happening is when you turn your attention within, your mind starts to dissolve. The egoic mind starts to dissolve, and you start to experience the universal mind more directly, which is your being. And when the mind collapses, which means it's saying when the limited collapses, what arises out of that is the boundlessness. Your mind, you become mentally boundless. Not egoic mentally boundless. You just become universally mentally boundless. And what follows after that? Your body does. Your body starts becoming less dense. It starts to expand as your mind expands. And this is about living in an experience of expansion. It's quite magical. So this is what could be called the war of grace. This is something that Ramana Maharshi called, especially these early phases of self-inquiry, this war within, right? This this battle that appears to go on inside you, where your vasanas are pushing you away from yourself, and grace is pulling within. You're trying to turn your attention within, and everything is trying to move you away from that. So there's this so-called battle or war within from the Bhagavad Gita. You know, the Bhagavad Gita is the very first chapter in the Bhagavad Gita is the war within. There's a war inside here, and if you're willing to go to battle, you can conquer in this war. And conquering leads to peace. No more war after you've annihilated the worst enemy you could ever come across, which is your ego. And monolea versus mononasa, where mono is mind and lea is temporary subsidence of mind, and nasa is elimination of mind. And monolea is when the ego is temporarily relaxed, it's subsided. So like at night when you sleep, ego goes into monolea, your mind goes into monolea. But if you notice that most of the time, whatever it is you're thinking of before you go to bed, when the ego rises again in the morning, those same thought streams kick right back in. So nothing is changing. If you're in an egoic realm and doing things like mindfulness or chanting or breath work or anything like that, which I would call meditation, it's only a state of monolea. It's temporary relief. The ego is just going to kick right back in, and you're going to experience the same experiences you were, mental experiences that you were. They might reside for a while. We understand that. That's been proven, but eventually they'll rise again. Ramana Nasa, when you turn your attention back onto yourself, you are actually eliminating the egoic mind, the ego. And this is why you experience real permanent change here, that peace and happiness stay. As the more that you eliminate your mind, the more it will come to your forefront of awareness, and it will be a permanent presence that doesn't go away. One of the things I want to point out is it is the ego that crosses the barrier and does self-inquiry. So there still is doing here, but again, it's wrapped up in this realm of being, and as you turn your attention more and more back to phase 6 or all the way to 180, what happens is the ego subsides. It's grace that pulls you. So eventually the ego will go to zero, and the love of yourself, the grace of yourself will pull you the last way. Some people say that time is slowing down when they do this, and the reason we use those terms is because we don't know any other terms. So we think that there's a loss of time, space, and world. What is happening when somebody says that time is slowing down is that you're actually experiencing eternity. You're starting to experience the eternal, and it is the absence of time. In the realm of existence and being, there isn't an infinitely long timeline in which you are a moment in time moving down that timeline. No, there is no time. And when there's no time, it then collapses the understanding, the previous understanding that I am this body. And when you realize you're not this body, then space goes away too. And that's where oneness is experienced. You're not over there and I'm not over here anymore. There just is what is. And the world also diminishes too. The objective world. Everything is still seen as it is, but you realize it's not an object with its own standalone existence anymore. This is oneness. You start to experience what we all use in this spiritual world of oneness. You experience it. And that's what makes Advaita the most profound, you could say, spiritual message there is that it says there's a path for you to experience oneness as yourself. It's just not a mental concept that most take it to be. It is reality. Pointers here in self-inquiry. Have no expectations or judgments. This is because the finite mind cannot know the infinite being. And so how can it have any idea on what to expect? It can't. It can't have any idea. So therefore, don't have any expectations. And no judgments. So some of your self-inquiry sessions will appear to be better than others. That's only to your mind. Okay? Again, your mind does not know the operations of existence, of being, of awareness. So what might appear to the ego as a lousy session, you have absolutely no idea if that's true or not. So do not judge any of your sessions. So go into them with no expectations. Be there as long as you can be there and rest in being as much as you possibly can. And when you come out of it and you go on with your life, do not judge your session. Just move on. And you will start to experience the benefits of it in your so-called day-to-day life. All right, phase 5. Notice how the arrow is getting smaller and lighter. This is where your major vasanas are eliminated. These big hitters, these really powerful ones that you've been working on the majority of your life, they have died down. They have simmered way down. Maybe most of them have even gone to zero and will never rise again. This is a peaceful place. This is a place where there's a silent mind and a still body. That there's no mental movement up here anymore. It's really calm and serene. You could say it's equanimity. And a still body. Your body is relaxed. It's comfortable to be yourself again. You're not all fidgety anymore. And this is where you can have longer periods of rest in being. This is where you can go for as many hours as you want, because your mind and body aren't just screaming at you to get up and move. And this is where a lot of so-called work gets done, or relinquishing gets done. It still gets done, but it's more of a pleasant experience because you're not feeling like a rocket anymore like you did in phase 4. And you have few thoughts. Thoughts are still here. They still arise. But what's happening is you're watching them arise from awareness, within awareness. Okay? And you're tackling them one at a time, just like you did in phase 4 with your vasanas. But this is where questions like, who is this I that thinks? Who is this I that you can name anything you want here? Frustrated. Everything can still arise here. It's just, it doesn't have the impact anymore. But you're trying to go to no thoughts. And this is true body expansion. Your body is in a realm of expansion, of becoming denselessness, and it's experienced directly. Pure clarity. Ego clearly seen as an illusion, that it was all a facade this whole time, and that reality has been here the whole time. It's kind of a shocker. Not kind of. It's a shocker that this reality has been here this whole time. It's been so simple, and we've made it so hard by building this thing we call ego, this separate self. And that is clearly seen through. Stage 6. This is what you could say is thought-free, silent awareness. Notice the arrow. Notice the adjuncts. It's now turned green. It's not an ego anymore. There's something that might still be there. It's just a vapor, if anything. And this is where only by grace alone can any progress from here occur. Because again, there's nobody left to do any relinquishing. It's only the love of yourself that is now pulling you in. Because you are just resting in and as pure being, in and as self directly, self alone. And as you hit directly back on 180, you look directly back and you experience yourself complete and direct. The only reason I left adjuncts there is just for visualization, because I'm trying to describe a paradox that can't be described. In fact, the whole green realm here from 4, 5, and 6 is a paradox that I'm trying to describe, and it can't be articulated to a point where you get it in a video. You have to experience it directly. But what happens here is, watch the ego. Boom! The ego goes, and you could say simultaneously, well, let's see what I got here. It's a full 180 degree turn. Okay? That you experience eternity in infiniteness directly. This is only through grace. The Chit Jata Granthi knot is severed. Let me go over this. This goes back to the two pieces of ego. The ego has the I am piece, it has a real piece, and it has an unreal piece, all of your adjuncts. So remember, these things are tied together with what we call the ego. And according to Advaita, Chit, Jata, Granthi, where Chit is being, Jata is body, and Granthi is not. The knot is severed. The knot of the ego is severed. And what happens is adjuncts collapse into being. Everything just collapses into being. And so the goal of self-inquiry is to break this bond, this knot between your adjuncts and your I am, and the real piece of you, I am. And this is only done by the ego turning around, turning its attention back onto its source and saying, oh, that's my real true home. I'm going home and I'm never leaving. This is total ego dissolution, destruction, annihilation, whatever terms you want to put on it. This is total mananasa. The ego never rises again here. There are terms for this. This is a self-realized being. In Sanskrit terms or Advaita terms, this is known as a jnani. Jnani is a self-realized being where the ego never rises again, and they experience reality directly as themselves. And when this happens, all that remains is I am. It's kind of going back to the original slide that I had, where the ego is coming up out of self as an arrow, it rises. All that remains here is just I am. And this is that first utterance that I talked about. And I am is in the realm of existence. It is on this side of the barrier. It is being. I am is being. And this is what is known as self-realization. Self knows itself alone with absolute clarity, where you, yourself, know yourself alone with 100% clarity. This is permanent alignment with non-dual reality. This is one without a second. This is not two. This is non-duality. This is Advaita. This is where suffering ends and ever-present happiness is experienced permanently, where nothing in the manifestation can move you away from yourself, regardless on how beautiful or ugly what's happening. You are a permanent being. So I am is self. I am is being, consciousness, bliss. I am is Sat Chit Ananda. Where Sat is being or existence, Chit is consciousness or awareness or knowing, and bliss is happiness, peace, love, beauty, joy. And this quote by Ramana Maharshi is as short and concise as it possibly can be. Awareness alone is I. The nature of I is Sat Chit Ananda. The nature of I, the nature of I am, the nature of myself is being, consciousness, bliss. Is being, consciousness, happiness, love, joy, peace, beauty. I hope this helped you understand how this plays out. If you need any other understanding, you can email me, or you can put comments below in the YouTube comments, and I will respond to every one of them. Take care.